Welcome to Money Talks. Today we're going to look at how entitlement works globally and see the reasons behind our bank failures, our pension failures, our financial institutions, and then we'll bring it into a very personal level of how our attitudes of entitlement are bringing failures into our own lives. We'll look at ways to reverse this. We'll look at the issue of why our attitudes of entitlement are a luxury that we can no longer afford. In the old days, on a global level, our standard of living was much lower. Our cars were basic, our entertainment was much less costly, and in most economies around the world, families were able to make it on one income. Over the years, as our standard of living rose higher and higher, it now takes two incomes just to survive. Instead of using one car for the family, now we see two cars or more for the family. Instead of just going to a movie and someplace inexpensive for dinner for a special night out, now we have very expensive forms of entertainment. In the old days, when we had a much lower standard of living, people actually sat around in the evening and talked to one another. They even read books. They listened to the radio and used their imagination to recreate the scenes in their heads. If you had a telephone, it was a luxury. People made appointments to see one another. They didn't sit on the phone for hours on end. Nowadays, there's very little personal interaction. People sit on cell phones, they do text messaging, they sit on their computers, they do instant messaging, emails or message boards. And social interaction has become a thing of the past. We're now leading very insular lives, and the end result is that we have more cases of depression, especially among teenagers and young adults. We see more people today on antidepressants than any other time in the history of mankind. And this is more than being just dissatisfied with your lot in life. It has more to do with feeling a lack of purpose in your life, having family and friends around you to share the good times and the bad times. This is about being able to live your life without having a single person in your life. Anything and everything that you can possibly want or need can be purchased online. You don't ever have to leave your house. In so many different ways, we can see the breakdown of the family and of the community coinciding with the breakdown of the economy. The higher standard of living that we've grown accustomed to isn't really about buying toilet paper in different colours, but it's actually separating ourselves from the family unit. Instead of listening to the radio and using our creative imagination, or reading a book and letting it take us to different locales, now we have to be entertained. Now we don't entertain ourselves. Now we need television, video games, the internet. But the worst part is that we've isolated ourselves from one another. Instead of conversation, we plant ourselves in front of televisions. Instead of board games that can be played with the family, now we're playing games on the computers. We're having online relationships that are usually disappointing, and we aren't reading books like we used to. People used to have to develop social skills. Now, with modern technology and a lack of social interaction, social skills seem to be at the bottom of the list of priorities. Unfortunately, the ills of society cannot be reversed by waving a magic wand over them. As a rule, people don't change unless they're forced to change. So how do we get past this attitude of entitlement? That the world owes us a living. That if you don't have what you want, that it's okay to steal. How do we go back to the basics of child rearing, where the parents made the rules and the children obeyed them? How do we get parents to see that their permissive attitude is damaging their children? That it's not okay to whine and cry until you get your own way? That we're raising a generation of children who are growing up to be irresponsible adults who are not held accountable for their actions? These same children will grow up to be dissatisfied with life, blaming others for their failures and not able to hold down a good job. So before we can fix the economy, we have to fix ourselves. We have to learn how to put back into the community what we've taken from it. We have to hold our bankers and our financial institutions accountable for everything. Our greed on a personal level corresponds with the greed on a corporate level. We've only to look at the increase in shoplifting, to the CEOs of major corporations who've stolen from their companies' pension funds. Now that we're facing very, very hard times, we need to see how our attitude is causing our own destruction. When the economy started to go down, a taxi driver in New York City was asked what he was going to do if people didn't have enough money to take taxis and he couldn't pay his bills. Without batting an eyelid and having to think twice about it, he said, "I'd steal." I heard of a woman in her 40s who walked through the produce department of a supermarket and started to eat the grapes and cherries that were on display. She didn't pay for them, nor did she feel guilty for having taken them. It was as if she had the right to sample whatever goods were out there. Although security would not have been called for pilfering grapes, especially since the goods would not be found on her, it's easy to see why a store owner's losses would have to be passed on to its customers. So to summarise the ways in which we can reverse this trend of entitlement that's destroying our social structures and our economy, try to connect with at least one person every day, reduce your television and video games usage, and socialise without spending any money on entertainment. Stay tuned, I'll be right back with more of these entitlement stories, and some of you may even recognise your friends, your family, your neighbours and your associates.